Bezalel Naor to speak about the Project of Hasidism. I just want to say a few words in B'shivcho shel Achsanya. This show is really a place where I feel heaven and earth meet. The Torah that comes forth in this place and the people who established the show were all the Yotzei Machdaot, were all part of the underground and fought and brought Torah to life with their hands to bring forth the establishment of the state of Israel. And it was led, the show was founded by Rabbi Aryeh Levine, and today is led by his grandson, Rabbi Benji Levine, who carries the core of Rabbi Aryeh Levine's Torah. And therefore it's a very unique place and very suitable for holding such an event like tonight, where we're going to be speaking about the Project of Hasidut and the way it, through the generations, and illuminates today. So I'd like to invite Rabbi Bezalel Naor. Thank you very much.
I want to thank everyone for coming. I want to thank Pomeranz, Yehuda Lou Kornreich, Alan Goldstein, who's the publisher of Kodesh Press. Wonderful name, right? Kodesh, you can't do better than that. And Solomon Shriki, of course. He stalks me. I don't know how he does it. When I speak in New York, he's there. When I speak in Shanghai, I don't know. He's Balmaifis. I don't know how he does it. Melumad Benisim. So I want to do my own Putchim Bechvod Achsanya. It's an old Jewish tradition. I actually know something about the Levin family because I was very good friends with a man named Avraham Yitzchak Levin, who was the Rav of Lower Merion Synagogue in Bala Cynwyd. That's a suburb of Philadelphia. So let me tell you a little of the Seder Shtalshalos, the genealogy of the Levin family. There's Rabbi Levin. I'm not going to go all the way back, which is amazing, but we'll start with Rabbi Levin, who Nachum mentioned, and he had a son, Chaim Yaakov Levin, who was really one of the Gedolei Hador. Never made it into the Rebbe cards, but believe me, he was Gaon with Tzaddik. And he produced a couple of sons. So one is Binyamin Beinish. I'm standing at his stand now. It says Binyamin Beinish. Then a guy in Tzaddik, Chaim Yaakov Levin. But I know the older son, Avram Yitzchak, and our first conversation went something like this. I, of course, asked him, how did you get the name Avram Yitzchak? And now you're going to hear the most amazing story you've ever heard in your lives. It goes like this. Avram Yitzchak Cohen Cook was Niftar of Gimel Elul in 1935. And the next year, 1936, there were terrible pogroms here in Yerushalayim. Rav Kook had this brilliant student, Chaim Yaakov Levin, the son of Rabbi Levin, who was the biggest chassid of Rav Kook, going all the way back to Yafo. And Mrs. Levin had witnessed some atrocity which traumatized her, and she was pregnant at the time. The doctors did not know whether she would survive, whether the unborn infant would survive, and her husband was, you can imagine what state he was in. So Mrs. Levin is in her bed in the bedroom, and Chaim Yaakov Levin is in the outer room studying, and he dozes off for a moment. And in this drama, who does he see? He sees his beloved teacher, Rav Kook, from Yitzhak Cohen Cook, who tells him Your wife will be fine. The baby will be fine. She's going to have a baby boy, and you will name the boy after me, Avram Yitzchak. The next thing he knows, his wife is walking towards him. She came out of her stupor, her catatonic state, whatever. I don't know. My brother's EMD, so he's got the lingo. I don't have it, but whatever. And she's totally fine. Okay, you know, dreams come, they go, they're soon forgotten. Fast forward. Sure enough, Mrs. Levine gives birth to a boy. The 8th day is the bris. And now, a elderly Yerushalmi, I was not told the name of the man, that evening before the bris sees Rav Kook, and he's wearing Big Day Yom Tov. You know, he had certain festive attire that he'd wear in Yom Tov. And this elderly Yerushalmi asks the Rav, "Where are you going?" He says, "I'm going to a bris. We have a bris in my mishpach, and I'm on my way to the bris, and that's why I'm trusted the Big Day Yom Tov." So this elderly Yerushalmi wakes up from his dream, and he goes to the home of the almana, Rebbetzin Kook. Her name was Reza Rivka Kook. And he tells her the dream. He said, "I just saw your man, you know, your husband. He was wearing Big Day Yom Tov, and he told me you have a bris in the mishpacha." So she's thinking her son Rav has no children. And then she remembers, she says, by Rabbi Levine, there's an Einikel, there's born a grandson. When Ed is Nemtavi Mishpacha, he's closer than family. Those were her exact words. Nemtavi Mishpacha. Rabbi Levine is closer than family. So quickly, this elder Yerushalmi runs from the Cook residence. I guess that's where you're these days, right? Rabbi Yitzchak is the Rav and Beit Haran. We have the Gabi, okay, whatever. And he arrives at the bris, and they're about to give the name. And he tells Chaim Yaakov what he saw in his dream. And when he told the father, Aviha Ben, Chaim Yaakov remembered his dream, which he had long forgotten months before. And that's how this baby, was the Ben HaBechor of Reb Chaim Yaakov, the grandson of Arthur, was given the name Avram Yitzchak. And he told me that whenever he meets Rav Tzviuda would address him as Hashem Harishon, the first name, because he was the first boy named after Avram Yitzchak, acclaimed. So that's my Kotchim B'chvod Asanya. I know a lot more about Tzimtzum. Okay. So, as Nachum told you, this is the project of Hasidism. It's bilingual, so if you open up right to left, you see in your national Hasidut. And there are two very important essays which are preserved in the original Hebrew. One you just heard in your national Hasidut, and the second one is Mishpat HaTorah u'Mishpat HaMlucha Midrashot Haran Admei ha-Shilo'ah. Now, these two seminal essays are translated to English. So if you come in from left to right, you'll get the Project of Hasidism in English. And there are other important essays in English without Lashon HaKodesh, without Hebrew. I'm just going to get a drink. let's cut to the chase. The thesis of this work is that the Hasidut of Rabbi Ba'al Shem Tov was an attempt to revive the lost art of Nevuah. You know, once upon a time, the Israelite nation had Nevi'im, Nevi'ot, had prophets and prophetesses, and that comes to an end at the beginning of Bayit Sheni, where the Chazal say that Chagai Zechariah Malachi were the last of the prophets. And after that, there are lesser forms of divine inspiration. There's Ruach HaKodesh, there's Bat Kol, there are Magidim, but not the classic Nevuah. I'm not the only one who says this. Of course, you know, I'm coming into this through the lens of Rav Kook. This is Rav Kook's perspective on Hasidut. Although he had a friend, Rav Kook had a friend, Rav Pinchas Linta, who says it outright. Rav Kook does say that in his various writings, but it's kind of muffled. But somebody who really, you know, gives it some oomph is this very dear soul friend, Yedid Nefesh of Rav Kook, Rav Pinchas Linta, and that's another whole sefer that I brought out. It's called Kanavute de Pinchas, where the granddaughter of Rav Linta, Hadassah Linfield, entrusted to me the manuscripts of her grandfather, and people are fascinated by it. This week I met with a great rabbi here in Yerushalayim, and he said, I've read all of your Sfarim, but this one I must own. I must have Kanute de Pinchas. What fascinated him was he heard that this is a critique of the Leshem. The Leshem is a great Kabbalist, a great Lithuanian Kabbalist, and Rav Linta critiqued his first sefer, the Leshem's first sefer. It's called Sefer Hadei'ah, Udrushay Olam HaToz. It was published in Pietrikov in Persat in 1909. And so this Rosh Yeshiva told me I have to have that. I have to see how he critiqued the Leshem. Okay, but we're not going into Rabbi Linta, and so we have to focus on the Dasht and the Ba'al Shem Tov. But as I started to say, as this work of mine was going to the printer, a dear friend stopped by, and he's an interesting fellow. He grew up in Satmar, and he's really Talmid Chacham Muflag. And I told him I'm on the way to the printer. I have a new sefer, which is all about Rav Kook's perspective on the Hasidut of the Ba'al Shem Tov, that it was an attempt to recapture Nevuah. And he said, that's unbelievable. He said, I just read that. I said, what? He said, yeah, there's a Bogaver Chassid. His name is Avram Abba Leser. He lives in Borough Park. And he wrote a thin sefer. It's called, what is it called? Messiahin Oto. Messiahin Oto. Nachum, you have another Messiahin Oto on Bitachon, but this one is about Nevuah. I said, I must have that. Bring it to me immediately because I'm on my way to the printer. So he brought it to me. And sure enough, this was a thesis of that sefer. Now, luckily for me, I published before he did, because otherwise I'd be accused of plagiarism. So a dear friend of mine instructed me that I must put in the introduction that my Inyan Shel Hasidut preceded his Messiahin Oto. Because before this came out, Inyan Shel Hasidut had appeared in the form of a kuntres, a booklet, and a lot of people have that. don't worry, this is an enlarged edition. So, it's Shnei Nevi'im et Navi b'signon echad. The two of us hit on the same thing, and somebody said, it seems to be, oh, you said that. You said, hey, this is Rebbetzin Judy Groth. When she heard this, she said, well, you know, it must be it's a zeitgeist, you know, because he thought of that and you thought of that, so it's in the air. This is in the air now. Okay, it's happening. I gave a talk in Ramat Beit Shemesh last Wednesday evening, and there was a Q&A at the end. Oh, is this Rabbi Bezalel Naor? Oh. It's an amazing Talmid Chacham, such a prolific author. His name is Rabbi Bezalel Naor. His specialty is Rashi, like my specialty is Rav Kook, his specialty is Rashi. So in the Q&A, it came up that, well, who's to say that the Ba'al Shem Tov is the beginning of this attempt? Maybe it goes back in time. Maybe they were early. Why, so many amazing Shamot coming in.
Not easy to find it either.
And I thought about it. I had a whole week to think about the question, right? So there's an essay of Rav Kook. It's called Derech HaTchiyah. I translated it into English as The Way of Renaissance. It's in the collection that I published, When God Becomes History, historical essays of Rav Kook. Rav Kook does a lot of historiography, as does Tzadok HaKohen. He was aware of that. Rav Kook was aware of similarities between what he's doing and what Tzadok is doing. And in the Derech HaTchiyah, again, I translated English as Way of Renaissance, Rav Kook goes through Jewish history and he shows that there are always two currents. And he has different terminology. One is, I'm going to call it book learning. He calls it, I think, limdi. Lamdas. And the other, and again, he has different words. Sometimes he calls it charisma. Good Hebrew word, right? Charisma. And he shows you these two lines. Now, this was something very controversial. It was published in Hanir, which is a defunct journal that came out in Tafresh Samech Vav, that's 1906. The Kanoim knew it very well. When Rav Kook arrived in Yerushalayim after World War I, the Kanoim took one select passage out of Derech HaTchiyah and they plastered it all over the billboards of Yerushalayim and Pashkevilim. It has to do with Oto Ha'ish, Jesus, okay? And they had never seen a Rav write anything positive about the man. Although Rabbi Yaakov had preceded Rav Kook, yes? Okay. Usually what you're getting in rabbinic literature is all pejorative. And so they filed that away from 1906 until 1919, 1920, when Rav Kook showed up in Yerushalayim, and there was an attempt to make him the Rav of Yerushalayim, and they took out that one passage. But what was it all about? So again, Rav Kook goes through this tension between these two forces in Judaism, the cerebral, the lomdish, the limudi, as opposed to the charismatic, the nevuah. Ruach HaKodesh. And he shows different instantiations through the generations. And one of them was Oto Eish. He says that it was an attempt to bring back that side of the charismatic leader. Right afterwards, he discusses Rabbi Akiva and Shimon HaAmsoni. This is a Gemara Pesachim, as I recall, where Shimon HaAmsoni Doresh Kol Etin Shebato. You know, we have this word et, 2 letters, Aleph Tav, and impossible to translate, and it's throughout the Torah. And this great Chacham, every time there was an et, he was able to darshan it, to give it some meaning. Until he came to Et Hashem Elokecha Tira, you shall fear the Lord your God. What could be the meaning of the et in this case? And then he said, Kishem shekibalti zachar ala drisha, kach akabel zachar ala prisha. I give up, okay? I stop. I received reward for all the drashot, and now I'm going to receive reward for stopping. But Rabbi Akiva stepped into the fray, and Rabbi Akiva darshan that et, the Rabbot Talmidei Chachamim. And Rav Kook says something very interesting. You know, this is not just about grammar or language. This is an ideological divide between Shimon HaAmsoni and Rabbi Akiva, where Rabbi Akiva is giving Talmidei Chachamim so much awe that they're on a plane with the Rebbein Shalom, with God. And that Shimon HaAmsoni could not abide. He was not willing to go there. He felt that's too much. You know, we have respect for our Torah scholars, but to put a Torah scholar on the same niveau with God, he was not willing to abide that. And then Rav Kook kind of fast forwards. He goes into Shichei Sheker, Shabtai Tzvi, Yaakov Frank, and how devastating that was for the Jewish people. But again, they were attempts to bring back the charismatic, the pneumatic, that's P-N-E-U-M-A-T-I-C. And after that, Rabbanim didn't want to hear anymore about Nevuah and Ruach HaKodesh. And this Rav Kook doesn't say, but we all know the Ramchal suffered. Moshe Chaim Luzzatto was in Padua in the early 1700s, and he had a Magid, some astral being, what came out of it was automatic writing. There are different kinds of Magid. Rabbi Yosef Karo, the Beit Yosef, had a Magid, but in that case it was a ventriloquist. It was seizing his vocal cords. Here, it wasn't vocal. It came out in the form of automatic writing, where he was writing at a furious pace, which was almost humanly impossible because it was coming through so fast and so furious. But the Ramchal was terribly persecuted by great men, Rabbi Yaakov Emden and Moshe Chachiz. You can read Elisheva Karlbach's The Pursuit of Heresy. It's a wonderful monograph on Moshe Chachiz. And this dynamic duo of Rabbi Yaakov Emden and Moshe Chachiz forced Ramchal into exile. He was forced to leave Italy. He went to Amsterdam. He became an Esrog Seicher. He was selling Sreigen. And from there he went to Israel, arrived in Akko, and succumbed to a plague almost immediately upon arrival. And Ramchal was buried in a kfar outside of Akko. I don't want to get into a discussion whether he seems very, but I believe that he's very close to Akko, not in Tveria. So, who came to save the day? Because it wasn't looking good for Nevuah and Ruach HaKodesh. Again, after the debacle of Shabtai Tzvi and Yaakov Frank, Rabbanim didn't want to hear about this stuff anymore. The one who came to the rescue was Rabbi Ba'al Shem Tov, Hasidut. Which brings us to the Project of Hasidism. Again, it's an attempt to bring back this dimension of Judaism. And it's a fascinating essay. I just reread the whole thing in Hebrew today to prepare for the shiur because I don't like to repeat myself. I don't want to give you what I gave last Wednesday night in Ramat Beit Shemesh, so I prepared a whole different talk for you. What happens to the Vilna Gaon? We all know that Vilna Gaon was the arch nemesis of the Hasidic movement. So, I imagine Maskilim will tell you Vilna Gaon was a rationalist, and Hasidim are mystics. But if you know anything about the Vilna Gaon, you know that he was an amazing Kabbalist, an amazing mystic. All you need to do is read the introduction of his Talmud, Reb Chaim Volozhiner, to the Be'or HaGra L'Sifrat Tzniuta, which I published in a different version from the standard version. I discovered that in the Library of Congress in Washington, of all places, there's a manuscript of the Vilna Gaon's commentary to Sifrat Tzniuta. And I publish it because it has variants. And Baruch Hashem, I had a beautiful haskama from my Rabbi Rav Shlomo Fisher, and it's not only a formal haskama, he engaged with it. Anyway, so Reb Chaim Volozhiner, who's the prime pupil of the Vilna Gaon, writes a beautiful introduction to the Vilna Gaon's intro to Sifrat Tzniuta, which is a very recondite portion of the Zohar. And there you can read about the life and times of Vilna Gaon, and he was constantly being visited by neshamot, like Yaakov Avinu. We can't do better than Yaakov Avinu, right? And so no, he's not this rationalist to the exclusion of mysticism. He himself is a mystic of great magnitude. So what does Rav Kook do with the Vilna Gaon? So it's very interesting. In this Derech HaTchiyah, he says that the Vilna Gaon had both, obviously. He had both dimensions. He had the Limudi and he had the Charismati, or whatever you want to call it. But the Ikar was the Limudi, and the Tefel was the Ruach HaKodesh. Now, I'm not sure I agree with that assessment, but that's what Rav Kook thought was true. Certainly, the yeshivas will uphold that for the Vilna Gaon, the Torah, Limudi, Lamdas, that would be the Ikar. There is Kabbalah, but that's the Tefel, that's the side dish. The main dish is the Nigla Dorais. Now, Rav Kook, this is in Yafo in Tafresh Samech Vav. It's like he's living today. I'm sure a lot of people have experienced this. You read Rav Kook, and it's like he's here with us today because it's
Geula.
So he brings it up today, but where are we? Where are we going with it? After he's taken us in this tour de force of Jewish history, so Tachlis, what do you want from us? And he says that in Eretz Yisrael, of course, we're going to get back this lost dimension of Nevuah, Kodesh. I guess I can throw in Barko, Magidim, it's all coming back. By the way, in the introduction, I quoted a man who was none too fond of Rav Kook. His name was Rabbi Yolish Teitelbaum. And the way I came to it, again, was through this Rabbi Abel Lesser, Messiano Tov, who's a Bobover. And if you know the ideologies of the various Hasidic courts, Bobov and Sadmar, they're on the spectrum, okay? So it was right. So this fellow Les was coming out with his kuntras, showing that the Ba'al Shem Tov is an attempt to recapture Nevuah, but he had to deal with a sefer called Vayol Moshe. Vayol Moshe is the Bible according to Sadmar. It's like Orot is the Bible according to Merkaz Arav, so Vayol Moshe is the Bible. Now the family who subsidized the latest printing, the Schweid family, are very close friends of mine. Going back to my boyhood in Washington Heights, we lived in the same building. And the patriarch of the family, Chazan Schweid, was a Chazan of our shul, which is very curious because this was a Mizrahi-oriented synagogue where on one side was the American flag, on the other side was the Israeli flag. And the Rav of the shul, Rabbi Yitzchak Weinberg, was a card-carrying member of the Mizrahi. I was sent to Yeshiva Soloveitchik. Yeshiva Rabbeinu Moshe Soloveitchik was a Mizrahi school where we studied Ivrit. People ask me, how do you know Hebrew so well? Usually the Nahagei Monit ask me, you know. So I said, first of all, is it Ivrit Shel Shabbat or Shel Chol? No. So I said, well, you know what, I learned in Yeshiva Rabbeinu Moshe Soloveitchik. But so this wonderful man, Chazan Schweid, he was a son-in-law of the Chelkas Yaakov. That's Rav Yaakov Mordechai Breish of Zurich. It was like the Ramesha Feinstein of Europe. We had Ramesha Feinstein. He came out of MTJ. Ramesha Feinstein in America, but in Europe, a counterpart, I would say, in Zurich was Mordechai Yaakov Breish, Chelkas Yaakov, who also wrote Shalot Utshuvot about electronics and whatnot. But so this fellow Schweid was a son-in-law of Rabbi Breish. So at a young age, I was exposed to Schweid and to Breish and wonderful people. So the Schweid family are Sadmar Hasidim, and you see the latest edition of Vayol Moshe, it's the Schweid edition of Vayol Moshe. But it was kind of enigmatic that he was a chazan in my grandfather's shul, which was a Mizrahi shul. So Rabbi Teitelbaum concludes on this note. Well, okay, so first, I might as well read it short. In a lengthy footnote, the author, this is Avram Abel Lesser, engages with the contention of Rabbi Joel Teitelbaum of Satmar that we do not know what the way of the Besh consisted of. This is a very important statement. The way of the Besh has been completely forgotten. The author quotes extensively from Rabbi Teitelbaum's Vayol Moshe, and I dug out this conclusion. Rabbi Teitelbaum concludes on this note: when Elijah and the Messiah arrive, they will bring Israel to repent and will enlighten our eyes with the depths of the Holy Torah. There will also be revealed the Torah of the Holy Besht, and prophecy will return to Israel, and the earth will be full of the knowledge of the Lord. May the Lord have mercy that we merit to see them sown. So Rabbi Teitelbaum was very eloquent in English, was he not? How are we doing for time? Is there a time frame?
We got till 10 and 11.
Okay, I'll share a little more. This essay, the Project of Hasidism, begins with the protocol, as it's referred to, like the minutes of a Simchat Beit HaShoeva in the Chotzer of the Izhbitser Rebbe. Who was the Izhbitser Rebbe? So again, to get back to Rav Kook, he grew up in a town called Griva. If you look at the map, there's a river. On one side of the river is a big city called Vince, and on the other side is a little hamlet called Griva. And that's Rav Kook's birthplace. You had a similar situation, Kovna versus Slobodka. Also, there's the Niemen River, and on one side is a big city of Kovna, Kaunas, Latvia. On the other side is Slobodka. And Rav Kook was the result of a mixed marriage between Hasidim and Misnagdim. His father, Shlomo Zalman, was a Misnagid. And Rav Kook's great-grandfather was one of the first Talmidim of the Bolozhner Yeshiva. He was a prime pupil of Reb Chaim Bolozhner. And in fact, Reb Chaim Bolozhner said that he's like the Rashba. He was the head of the Rashba. That was Rav Kook's great-grandfather. If you want, I can give you the genealogy, but people usually get very bored with these things and their eyes glaze over very fast. But Rav Kook's father was Shlomo Zalman, and Shlomo Zalman's mother was Batya Freida. Her brother was Mordechai Yosef, was the Rav of Rosh Hashanah, who wrote a wonderful super commentary on Ramban called Chelet Mordechai. Not too easy to obtain unless it's been brought back into print. Now, Mordechai Gimpel and his sister, Batya Freida, had a father, and he, as I said, he was from Mesarar Rishonim. He was, you said I'm Mesarar Rishonim, but he was Mesarar Rishonim of the Bolozhner Yeshiva. And his name was Dov Ber. In those days, you could have a last name. Last name was Yafa, but usually you're known after the town where you came from. So he was known as Dov Ber Turitz. He came from Turitz. So that's the patrilineal descent. But the matrilineal descent, which it's going to start to get into, Rav Kook's mother, her father, Rafal, was a Koppus Chassid. Now, what is Koppus? Everybody heard of Lubavitch, but nobody heard of Koppus today. So there was a man called the Tzemach Tzedek, the Menachem Mendel Schneerson. Tzemach Tzedek are his Shelot Shuvah. He's named after his Sefer. That's another way we call people. You could have a last name, you could have a Sefer, you could have a town. So he's the Tzemach Tzedek. And after he was niftar, the sons diverged, and the youngest son, Marash, Shmuel, stayed in Lubavitch, which is interesting. You would think it would go to the oldest son and went to the youngest son. But there was another son, Mahariel, of Yehuda Leib, who went to Koppus. And he didn't last long, maybe a year. And then he was succeeded by his son, who became very famous. His name was Shlomo Zalman. Last name Schneerson, you know that. And so he was the Izhbitser Rebbe. And it was a very important Hasidut. The reason I said it was a very important Hasidut, if you look at who the Hasidim were, there was the Rogachover and Rav Kook's family, or let's say in Kishinev, you had Rabbi Bezalel Naor, who becomes the chief rabbi of Romania, killed in the Holocaust. He was a Izhbitser. So when I say it was an important chassid, this is my my way of measuring. I look at who the adherents were. So they were giants in Igla, people like the Rogachover and Izhbitser. Now, as I said, this the Inyanashal Hasidut begins with it's like a video of a Simchas Beis HaShoeva by the Kabbalah Rebbe, and we have the exact minutes. Now in Koppis, there was a custom that the Rebbe doesn't start to say Torah until one of the Hasidim asks him to say Torah. The way I understand it is it's this concept itaruta de l'tata. Before there can be the itaruta de l'elah, so there has to be the arousal from below. So that was the minhag, that a chassid would ask the Rebbe to please say Torah, and then the Rebbe would proceed. But on this occasion, when the chassid asked the Kabbalah Rebbe to say Torah, he refused. And he explained, he said, at Simchas Beis HaShoeva, there was no Torah. The Chassidim can't wrap their minds around it. So what do you mean? Simchas Beis HaShoeva, back in the days of the Beit Hamikdash, there was no Torah? So that's right, but they had Ruach HaKodesh, because that's why it's called Simchas Beis HaShoeva, at least according to Yerushalmi, which is according to Tosfos. Shemisham Shoavim Ruach HaKodesh, and there's a story in Yerushalmi that the prophet Yonah ben Amittai, was at the Simchas Beis HaShoeva, and that's when he started to prophesy. So they asked him, well, what do you mean there's no Torah? That's how they procured the Nevuah. Rabbi said, no. It didn't come from Torah, it came from Simcha. From Simchas Beis HaShoeva. And he did say Torah. Now, when I saw this, lights went off in my head. This is unbelievable. Because first of all, Chabad is considered the most intellectual school of Hasidism. I know Gur is very longish, but Chabad is Chochmah Binah Dat. It's an intellectual variety, a Litvische Hasidus. And here's the Kabbalah Rebbe, and who would know better than the Kabbalah Rebbe, saying that that's not how you achieve Nevuah. It's not through Torah, it's through Simcha. Somebody said, well, what's the Chiddush? The Rambam said it, and the Hilchot Yisodei Torah, before that the Gemara Shabbos said it. The Gemara says, Eina Shechina Shora L'mitoch Simcha, but the Rambam has Eina Nevuah Shora L'mitoch Simcha. Now let's delve into this a little deeper. This is very important. The thought occurred to me that the Rambam and the Ba'al Shem Tov are like mirror images of one another. Because one of the great things that the Rambam accomplished was to take Nevuah out of Halakha. So there's a famous Gemara B'Metzia, Daf Nuntet, and Orachnai, Lo Bashamayim Hi, but the Rambam really worked it up to a very important principle in Judaism, that prophecy has no influence at all upon the halachic decision-making process. Okay. Now, there are many important contributions of Rambam. One is he's battling against anthropomorphism and Shemat Alafut, but I would consider this equally important, that he maintains that there is no room, that Nevuah cannot step foot in the domain of Halakha. The Besh is doing the opposite. And that's what you're getting through the mouthpiece of the Kabbalah Rebbe, that there's no place for Torah in Nevuah. You want Nevuah? I can give you Nevuah. Simcha, music, the famous Pasuk, Vayhi Kimnagen Hamnageh, Vati Alav Yad Hashem. Music is conducive to Nevuah. And so on and so forth. So when you think of it, these two, the Rambam and the Ba'al Shem Tov, are kind of mirror images of one another. The Rambam wants to deliver halacha stripped of nevuah, and the best, so Ba'al Shem Tov wants to deliver a nevuah which is stripped of Torah. Now this is a very radical statement, but Hasidism is a very radical movement. So the book begins with this scene in the court of the Izhbitser Rebbe. I think I forgot to fill in. So, as I told you, Rav Kook's grandfather, Rafal, the last name is Feldman, was a Kabbalah Hasid. But what a Hasid! He established the shtibel, the Kabbalah shtibel in Riva. He brought the choser of the Kabbalah Rebbe. His name was Rav Yosef. I just have to explain what a choser is. This is I think it's uniquely Chabad, where after the Rebbe says a minor, says a mamar chasidut, there's a man who's almost as competent as the Rebbe in Hasidut. And the Hasidim afterwards gather around the choser, and he breaks it down for them. That's a choser. Rabbi Menachem Mendel Schneerson had a choser with Yel Khan, who was a former Talmud of Rav David Povarsky in Lod, which was a shlucha of Panovich. Interesting man. I brought his name up today because I was telling someone a story that I once went to a Fabrengen in 770 Shavuot, and I wanted to be by the Rebbe's feet. Why? I wanted to be Mekayim then, so I stationed myself. I knew where the Rebbe would be, and I came hours before, and I stationed myself where his feet will be. Now the problem with that was I didn't know that this is prime real estate. You know, I came from Bangor, Maine. What do I know, right? So sure enough, there shows up Rabbi Yoel Khan, who's the choser, the Rebbe's choser. I'm here, he's here. And then there shows up another man here, Rabbi Yamin Klein, who's the Rebbe's maskir. And Benjamin Klein says to Yoel Khan, like, who is this? I'm getting him out of here now. You know, things are not looking good for little Bezalel Naor. And Rabbi Yoel Khan rose to my defense. Amazing. And he said, listen, he said, I know he's been here for hours already. Listen, so, I should have a lichtige Gan Eden. He defended me. And since I was there in that prime real estate, I was able to overhear a very intimate conversation that the Rebbe had with various individuals. It was Shavuos, so there's no mic. But so Rabbi Raphael, who was the maternal grandfather of Rav Kook, brought the Kabbalah Rebbe's choser, Rav Yosef, and set him up in Riva in the Beis Medrash there. And that was Rav Kook's exposure to Chabad Hasidut as a child. He would hear these mamorim from Rav Yosef. But I started to say that we're not finished with the Kabbalah because we've got this one very important statement that at Simchat Beit HaShuravad, there wasn't Torah. That's not the conduit to Nevuah. The conduit to Nevuah is Simcha, however you arrive at Simcha. And it could be through Nagina, it could be through Rikud, various ways. And then we're going to conclude with the Kabbalah Rebbe. And this statement of the Kabbalah Rebbe that I'm going to share with you momentarily, I believe is the only Chabad Hasidut that Rabbi Yoel Teitelbaum was thrilled with. He loved this. What is the statement? If you get a hold of the Sefer Magen Avot, which the Mamarim of the Izhbitser Rebbe, when you first come into it, the introduction, it's called Mamar Ganana. Ganana is the Aramaic of Ganan, of the garden. And it first circulated as a kuntres, but it was incorporated into the Sefer Magen Avot as the Hakdama. And it quotes something from the Zohar about a Ganana, the garden, and he's tending his garden and watering his garden. But the problem with that is that Yevash Hamaya dries up, the water supply dries up. And this Mamar Ganana, Rav Shlomo Zalman Schneerson, came out with immediately following his father's premature demise. And what year was that? So, let's see, it's Tzemach Tzedek, it was Niftar around 1866, so this would be a year later, 1867. And he comes out with this astounding statement that the Hasidut of the Ba'al Shem Tov lasted for 150 years, and that's it, it's finished. Yevash Hamayam, it dried up now. And the Satmar Rebbe loved this, because that's his understanding that Hasidism is finished. And, he would produce this statement of the Izhbitser Rebbe that the Besh, the Hasidut HaBesh, the Teres HaBesh, lasted for 150 years, which is when Maharil, Schneerson, Shavak Chaim L'chol Chai, and that's it. And there's no more Hasidism today. So yeah, people wear Bekishes and Streimels and Gartlach, but that's not Beshtian Hasidism. That's the Chitzenius. It's the Levush, it's the outer trappings, the attire, but what they call in modern here Liba, Liba, the core, it's over. So I say that this is the only teaching of Chabad Hasidus that Rabbi Teitelbaum eagerly embraced, because that was his whole Zitzin Leben. It's known that he could get along better with Litvische Rosh Yeshivas than with his fellow Hasidic Rebbe. It's known. Maybe reminiscent of the Kotzker. And I write quite a bit about the Kotzker, Mendel Morgenstern, the Kotzker Rebbe, who said that he's an Ibor Neshama of the Gra, of the Vilna. Now, how do I know this? Again, there's a whole genealogy. There was a man known as the Novominsker Rebbe. He was the Rosh Achdut Yisrael, Yaakov Perlov. And in Baltimore, he visited a tzaddik Mister, Landavovnik, Michael Eliezer, a Cohen Forschlager. And Rav Forschlager was a Talmud Muvhag of the Sochachover. Who's a Sochachover? The Sochachover was a son-in-law of the Kotzker Rebbe. Very great halachist, Avnei Nezer, Shalot Shuvot Avnei Nezer. And Rav Forschlager had received some very intimate details about the Kotzker Rebbe from his Rebbe, from Sochachover. That's Rabbi Avram Bornstein. The family name is Bornstein. And one of them was that the Sochachover believed that he's a Ibor Neshama of the Vilna Gaon.
Kotzker. You said the Sochachover.
Oh, slicha, the Kotzker, thank you. The Kotzker believed that he's a Ibor Neshama of the Vilna Gaon. Now, what's Ibor Neshama? So there's in Kabbalah, there's two different concepts. One is Gilgul, which means that someone dies, And that soul reincarnates in a baby that's born afterwards. Born neshama means that they can be contemporaries, because the Kotzker, Mendele, was born while the Vilna Gaon yet lived. So it's a fascinating concept that he could receive the neshama, the Vilna Gaon, while the Vilna Gaon yet lived. And that puts into perspective so many things about Kotzk. There's an important statement of the Kotzker, which I quote here, and I try to unpack it. There are various ways to understand, but the statement goes like this. There's a Yerushalmi Brachot which says, Kol hadrachim bechezkat sakana. When you're journeying on the way, all of the ways are fraught with danger, with perils. And the Kotzker quoted Yerushalmi, Kol hadrachim bechezkat sakana, and he said, the truth is, there are many ways to the Rebbeinu Shalom, but they're all bechezkat sakana. And the only sure path to God is Torah. Now, what are these other paths? You want to know, what is he alluding to? Should I go up on a mountain in Tibet, or what? So there's several pages in the Project of Hasidism to try to determine what he had in mind. His grandson, the Shem Shmuel, okay, this Kotzker and the son-in-law, the Sachachot, and his son is Reb Shmuel, which is Shem Shmuel. And it's known that if you want authentic sayings of the Kotzker, you go to the Shem Shmuel, because there are a lot of sayings of the Kotzker. The Kotzker said this, but how do we know what's authentic? Most of it is not. But the stuff that was preserved by the grandson, you can be somech on, you can rely on that. So he has this statement that Kol hadrachim bechezkat sakana, v'chutz Torah, in a few places in Shem Shmuel, and each time he interprets it differently. So one time the alternative would be to look at niflaot haboreh, nature. Like the Rambam in Hilchot Yesodei Torah, where you observe nature, you observe the wonders, the miracles of nature. That would be one of the other drachim that his grandfather would. And each time he quotes it, there's another alternative. He thinks, and this is a chutzpah, I think he was referring to Hasidus. I think he effectively was shutting down the Hasidus Habesh. He was saying, it's bechezkas sakana. Yes, it is a way. It's an authentic way to God, but it's perilous. It's fraught with danger. So you know what? Follow the Vilna Gaon. Sit in the base medrash, learn Torah. Don't head out to the caves and the forests. Now, it's a chutzpah on my part, that's not what the Shem Shmuel writes, but I think that's what the Kotzker is really all about. So, to go back to Rabbi Rosh Teitelbaum, I guess he's someone like the Kotzker. I don't know if he considered himself a Hebrew Neshama of the Vilna Gaon, but effectively what he's doing is he's shutting down Hasidut Habesh, and he's pulling in that statement of the Kotzker Rebbe that it was a glorious tradition for 150 years, and then the Shengandik, it's over. So I think on the word Gandik, we'll end it. Now let's do a Q&A. Let me just get a drink first. Yeah, that looks about from 6 to 7. I think that's what I usually do. Hold on, let me just get a drink.
Where do we find these aspirations? When you are Kitzbei ha-Shilo'ah, Magid, Balatanya, Yeah.
Okay. All right, so, yeah, he was asking, do we have sources, like written sources in the Hasidic literature that would bear this aspiration for prophecy? There are a couple of answers, but let's give you one for starters. Rabbi Kook's Yedid Nefesh, Rabbi Linton, and again, I had unpublished manuscripts of this man, quotes the Noam Elimelech. Noam Elimelech is quoting his rabbi, the Izhbitser Rebbe, Dov Ber Misrich, the Magid Hagadol, the great Magid. Although he refers to him as the Magid of Rovna, because before he came to Misrich, he was in Rovna. It's in the Ukraine, it's called Rivne. You know. All these spellings change. And the Magid gave a mashal of a king. He said, you know, when the king is ensconced in his palace, it's very hard to gain admission, to have an audience with the king. But what happens when the king is on the way? He's traveling, and he stops at an Aksanya. And so now he's more accessible. Now the common people can have access to the king. I'm going to tell you an amazing story that comes from my family. Lou, you knew my grandfather. Did you know my grandmother too, or
Sure.
Yeah. So her saga is fascinating. What the Mir Yeshiva did in World War II, my grandmother did in World War I. It's called the Trans-Siberian Railroad. And this was at the time of the Russian Revolution. And the Tsar and his family were held prisoner in Siberia. And the Alperovich family were passing through. And my great uncle, my grandmother's older brother, spoke to the Tsar, Tsar Nikolai. Now, can you imagine this? This is a Jewish youngster. The Tsar was none too fond of Jews, but in his fallen state, he was now no longer Tsar Nikolai. He was Mr. Romanov, and in those circumstances, here a Yiddish kind spoke to Tsar Nikolai. So that's the mashal of the Magid. And the nimshal is that back in the day, the Shechina was very selective. Not everybody could become a Navi. But now the Shechina Begalusa, the Shechina's in Golos, it's in exile. Beggars cannot be choosers. And you know what? If you're just a simple God-fearing Jew, you'll have the Chalos Shechina, Chalos Navur. So that's from Rabbi Linton. There's also the Piasetzner Rebbe. Now, this is controversial. The Piasetzner Rebbe, who's known as the Rebbe of the Warsaw Ghetto, Kalonimus Kalnish Shapira Hashem Yikol Damo, he believed this way. But again, I don't think too many others will jump on board. But that was a Piasetzner reading of the Hasidut Hadesh. And I do mention him, and this other fellow, Messiah Oto, also accessed the Piasetzner. But again, not everybody will embrace this this interpretation of history that you're getting in the Piasetzner Sfarim. Rav Kook and the Piasetzner, there's a fellow in Chicago who has two photos hanging on the wall. One is Rav Kook and the other is the Piasetzner. And he asked me, what do you think? I said, it's Pasha, because they're both in pursuit of Nevuah. That's something common to the two of them. And then in Eretz Yisrael, the Piasetzner had his brother, they called him Mordechai Yosef Leiner. The Piasetzner Rebbe in Ramat Beit Shemesh today is a grandson of Admor Chalutz. And the Admor Chalutz was a Chassid of Rav Kook, and he published an early collection of Rav Kook's teachings, which is called Eretz Chayfetz, which has been brought back into print. Another question? Yeah.
I'm trying to understand when you talk about this idea of nevuah, what's the tochen of the nevuah that the Hasidim are talking about? If it's not in the realm of Torah, so what are we looking for? How will I know? How will I? Not me, but a person who comes and says, "I've had a." Like even Rav Kook, I know Rav Kook even says there's that famous quote that "Ani mitnaber," and he has this fear.
Yeah,
I'm trying to understand what's the tochen.
Yeah. Well, first I want to engage with what you just mentioned, that before the Shmona Kvatzim, there was Orot HaKodesh, the Rav David Cohen, or Rabbi Nasir, went into 8 notebooks of Rav Kook. And I don't know how he did it without a computer, but he did it. And he came out with this magnum opus, Orot HaKodesh, where he arranged these entries from the various diaries in a topical fashion. Sudan, Seder Nifla, Seder Mufti. Now, when you come to Kalach, which is a good number, 138, there's a book which was thought to be Ramchal, Kalach Titzchei Chochmah. Yosef Spinner doesn't think it's Ramchal, but anyway, but a lot of people think it's Ramchal. But Kalach, in Kabbalah, 138 is fraught with significance. So when you come to Kalach, in the Orot HaKodesh, there are ellipses, there are these dots. Oh, hey, you want to hold it up?
This first paragraph is bracketed, so you just number Kalach, 7 or 8 dots, and then starts here. Only later on, he skips it.
So, obviously, there's just some censorship. What is in that passage we now know, because we have the unexpurgated Shmona Kvatzim. And it's Rav Kook's own personal experience where he felt that he had achieved Nevuah. And then he says, but if I tell people, will I be thought as a Navi Sheker? So it's a very interesting passage. It's autobiographical. It's his own, what he considered a prophetic experience, but he has problems with that, if he can reveal it. So I think you're right. I think Rav Kook thought he achieved Nevuah. By the way, there's an interesting essay by Heschel, which Heschel himself pointed out to me. I actually met a Rav Yeshua Heschel. I met so many people, Baruch Hashem, but there were so many others that I missed. But Baruch Hashem, I met a lot of good people. So Heschel himself referred me to Heschel's article, which, and it's now been translated to English. Did the Rambam believe that he had achieved Nevuah? And me and the Rambam should receive Nevuah. So Heschel thought that the Rambam thought that he had achieved Nevuah. Rav Kook thought he achieved Nevuah. The Nazir, I'm not sure about. He might have believed that he had achieved Nevuah. I'm undecided.
We don't have anything that he says in terms of.
So what I'm trying to understand
It's like, how do you know when you get it?
No, I'm not. That's not my concern, because I'm sure I'm not. But I'm thinking about the person, even Rav Kook. or who says they've had this nevuah or hesher, what am I supposed to hear? Is not the tafkid of the Navi to speak? Isn't it like all the Nevi'im in Am Yisrael, all the Nevi'im in the Tanakh?
Okay,
They speak to Am Yisrael, but the tochen of all the nevuot are keep Torah, keep mitzvot, do tshuva, don't do avodah zarah. That's what I'm trying to understand. Like, almost like what's the nafkamina of this whole
when you study Rambam, Hilchot Yesodei Torah, Perek Zayin, so the Rambam will tell you that there are different kinds of Nevi'im. There are Nevi'im that are not messengerable. You're thinking that a Navi, by definition, is someone who is going to go out with some kind of message, stop worshiping idolatry. So the Rambam sets us straight. That's one kind of Navi, but there's a Navi that has his own, I don't know what to call it, personal edification, and he's not a shaliach. He's not sent out as a shaliach. So there are different varieties, like William James has varieties of religious experience. So in the Rambam, there are different kinds of Nevi'im.
Doesn't the Gemara say that there was hundreds of thousands of Nevi'im? Gemara said that.
Yeah, Kiflaim Piyatzah.
Yeah.
So you're saying that we're talking about a personal experience. Is this the Hasidic project? Is it?
Well, I would say that the Rambam got it right. Some of these people, we may never know that they were Nevi'im because it was something that they enjoyed, which they did not share. Others we do hear about because they come out with some message. I want to read a passage.
What evidence did he want you to come back?
This is from Naftali Bachrach. It's Eina Kamelech. It was published in Amsterdam in 1648. And he's talking about Rabbi Isaac Luria, the Ari. I'm giving you the English translation. I don't have the Hebrew original in front of me. So Bachrach says of the Ari, his entire desire was to polish the souls of his disciples so that with time they would become prophets, shining a great light to all Israel, so that the generation be not bereft, and to redeem Israel. So it's interesting the way I'm seeing the Besh, that's the way he's seeing earlier the Ari, because Ari's in Sfat, is Niftar in Shin Lamed Bet, 1572, and the Besh is born, according to Chassidim, he's born here in Nachat, which is 1698. Secular historians will tell you he was born in 1700. But L'chol HaDeor, we know when he died, it's 1760. Another question? Yeah.
Just reflecting on the last two names you mentioned, Ramchal and Mesilas Yesharim, he lays out this Zeirut, Zezut, and the path leads to Ruach HaKodesh, and eventually the Nevuah. And in the same way, the Izhbitser Rebbe, Chovat HaTalmidim, Sharat HaAvrachim, and Mavos She'arim, they both lay out journey takes you from studying Torah and Mitzvot eventually to Ruach HaKodesh and prophecy. And they lay it out in a very careful, balanced way.
I want to go back to that essay that I read in preparing for this. It's called Derech HaTchiyah, and I think I forgot to tell you the Uvechem, the Tachlis, where we go with this. So, one of the things that Rav Kook says is that when we will have leaders who are Balei Ruach HaKodesh, that will have a beneficial effect on the entire Jewish people. And I told you earlier, this machloka between Rabbi Akiva and Shimon Amsoni, but so this is one of the things that is very important in Hasidut. And again, it's bechezkat sakana, I would say, because a as Reb Chaim Volozhin pointed out in Nefesh Chaim, unfortunately, what comes out of this sometimes is avodah zarah. Reb Chaim Volozhin says that it could be a navi, a bona fide navi, and you want to be dovik to him, but as if this man is a god, that's avodah zarah. So on the one hand, Hasidut is wonderful. It gives us the Hidolah Shimusha Yotem Limudah. You know, it's one thing to sit in a classroom and have an instructor, and it's another thing to have a rabbi. You know, it's a whole different experience. And now I won't say that the Litvish did not have it. Obviously, they did have it. You know, the Talmidei HaGra were very devoted to their rabbi, but the Hasidim had it more. This idea that we have to be doved to the Rebbe, to the Tzaddik, and then there are the excesses, which unfortunately we've seen many times over. It becomes idolatrous, it becomes an avodah zarah. So you don't want to throw out the baby with the bathwater. If we could take out this veikut to Talmidei Chachamim that we have in Hasidut, and not go overboard where it veers into avodah zarah. But that's one of the uvechens at the end of Rav Kook's essay, is unfortunately, a lot of our leaders are bereft of Ruach HaKodesh, understatement, and what comes out of it is the hashpah and the door. And if we could have Gedolei Yisrael that would be blessed with this divine inspiration, then the whole generation would benefit from it. Now, one of the amazing things, to me amazing, is the democratization of Ruach HaKodesh in the Bet Midrash Shel HaGra. You would think the opposite. You would think that it's the Besh, the Talmidav, who opened it up to the masses. And that the Litvish, the Vilna, the Talmidei HaGra were the ones who said, no, this is not for the masses, this is for the elite. And I discovered, I think this is a contribution that I made, I discovered the exact opposite. And I don't know whether the people out there will engage with me or ignore me. Usually they ignore me, which is fine. I found that in the writings of the Talmidei HaBesh, it's the tzaddikim that have the nevuah, not the masses. The masses, what they can do is they can be dovek, they can cling to the, dovek b'talmidei chachamim. And if you take a look in the famous Be'or Gra Mishlei. Now I know it was not written by the Gra, it's written by his Talmud, Reb Mendel Shlover, and we can thrash that about. But there is this famous statement, everybody knows it, but I don't think that they caught the tail end of it, which is supremely important. It goes like this, that once upon a time, you didn't have to take an aptitude test to decide what you should do for a living. You would go to the Navi, and the Navi would say, okay, you should be a nuclear physicist, you should be a judge. But we don't have Nevi'im anymore. And so the tail end of the state, and everybody knows that, that's very famous. Anybody in any decent Litvish yeshiva has studied the Be'er Gra Mishlei and knows this famous statement that once upon a time you go to Navi, and now it's not so easy. How am I to know what I should do? If I should become a writer, I should become a bus driver. Maybe I should become a bus driver. Maybe I missed out on my vocational life. But the tail end of the statement is, every Jew has Ruach HaKodesh. That's the tail end of the statement. So that is a democratization of Ruach HaKodesh. Every Jew could be a Ba'al Ruach HaKodesh. You don't need a Navi. Right, we don't have Navi and Navi. Every Jew has Ruach HaKodesh. Now this is very different than Hasidut, because in Hasidut, not every Jew has Ruach HaKodesh. I have to go to the Rebbe. I have to go to the Tzaddik.
I wonder if that would still hold today with the current school of thought in the British world, in terms of what they copy from Hasidism, the Das Torah world, and that whole
Yeah. Well, that's Lawrence Kaplan.
What is that?
Lawrence Kaplan was vilified at the time. He came out with an article that Das Torah was actually a modern concept, and it was foisted by the Buddha. It doesn't go back in time very far. And of course they came at him the Cherev V'Chanit. It's an interesting article, Lawrence Kaplan.
Just what authority do we give this whole school of revelation? Even from the Arizal, I mean, this might be a little, but like there seems to be a whole new, this whole school of revelation that is actually now putting change into the Jewish halakhic code and concerning what would Ram
Yeah,
say
so
about
okay,
this?
so last Wednesday night, my host was a dear student of mine, Rabbi Eli Allen, who follows the Ben Ish Chai. And he pointed out, this is an interesting machloka between Chacham Ovadia, Rav Yosef, versus the Ben Ish Chai, where the Ben Ish Chai allows this seepage, I call it, of Lurianic Kabbalah into his halachic process. And Rav Yosef rejected that. So that's not halacha. There's no room for Kabbalah in halacha, and he doesn't concur with the Ben Ish Chai. So that's a very interesting update.
What about its existence at all? Like, we don't find historically that prophets introduced such a wild transformation. This whole thing, this whole creative element of Kabbalah and the history of it, how do you deal with it? And this is controversial, I'm asking, but I'm thinking overall, like,
So-
what would the Rambam have said? You know,
All right,
Rambam-
so hold on. You're asking about Kabbalah, which is a medieval phenomenon,
Right.
like Ramban and people like that.
But I mean, it goes further and further, because like, the question is how do you, the Ba'al Shem Tov is also coming from.
By the way, in the Hasidic world, there's someone who's allowing this fusion. That's the Kamarna. The Kamarna is about halacha, but it's a halacha that's suffused, I think, so that we're suffused with Kabbalah. So we're getting different voices of different poskim, how to paskin halacha. Can I allow Kabbalah to inform my judgment? Now, when we come to Rav Kook, this is very interesting. I know a thing or two about Rav Kook, in case you haven't noticed. Not only his machshava, but his halacha too. And if you go into the Sheilot and Shuvot, there are some, not too many, where where Kabbalah is entering. A very famous one is about the Harabayit. He goes through the different shitot, the Rambam and the Ravad, because the Rambam says that there's karet if you go on the Harabayit, and the Ravad, that there's no karet. So what is it? Is it a lav, greda? Is it heter gamor? Chaim Hirschenson, of course, that's Mutter Ganzen. But so since it's the Ravad, and we know that the Ravad was Aviyam Kubalim, so here's an instance where Rav Kook tries to understand what the Ravad's Kabbalistic perspective on the issue would be. And the way he does it is through Sefer Elima of the Ramak, and talks about the difference between Beit Rishon and Beit Sheni. The problem with that is, and I've seen that elsewhere with Rav Kook, there are different schools of Kabbalah. And sometimes Rav Kook is not differentiating between one school and another. So you're reading Rav Moshe Cordovero back into Ravad. That's highly problematic, to say the least. I saw that also in Shmuel Raya, where he's not appreciating that Zohar and Ramban are two very different schools of Kabbalah. Now, somebody like Moshe Del could have enlightened Rav Kook in this respect. There's Catalonian Kabbalah, Gironese Kabbalah, Girona, and versus Castilian Kabbalah, which is Zohar. Now, there's another tshuva where Rav Kook calls Kinat Hashem Tzvakot. That is by Ramchal, that's for sure. The other one, the Kalach, I'm not sure about that. And this idea that the Ramchal has that the Averah Lishma would be only by women, Rahel was the prime example, but never by men. And Rav Kook says something, well, that's good Kabbalah, but in Halacha, it's not that way. It could be by men too. That's the tail end of a tshuva. There's another tshuva about Shem and Shum Shumim. This was a big machloket back in the day. Achim Braslavi in Yafo, they were producing sesame oil. And Rav Kook was the Rav HaMachshir, and the Bezdin Shel Chasidim in Yerushalayim, the Dayan was Rav Litman David Shuvaks. Got down in Rav Kook, it's kidneys, Shem and kidneys, and the whole discussion. And this I put in the Rav Kook Haggadah. That at the end of the tshuva, which is halachic tshuva, Rav Kook has this Kabbalistic thing about Shem and Shum Shumim, which is, it's like a parperet lechochma. So I've given you a couple of marei mekomot where you can see in Rav Kook where he's allowing seepage of Kabbalah and halacha, but by and large, he's a straight posek, he's not like the commander or the Ben Ishpai. These are very rare instances, I would say. So, what do you want to do? You want to adjourn at 7:30?
Can I ask one last question? The best strategy to bring back the Nevuah in any way reflects an understanding of why the Nevuah ended when it ended, and if the Nevuah had been brought back, would Hasidut today be practiced in the same way that it is currently being practiced? Would it be more relevant and not lost in history?
Okay, so the first question is, does Besh tell us why we lost it to begin with? I have to think about it, but I can tell the Rambam and Mar Nevuchim and Chelik. By the way, there's a whole section of the Guide of the Perplexed which is about prophecy. And scholars believe that this was originally going to be a separate sefer, because the Rambam alludes that he's written a sefer on Nevuah, and what happened to it, and the thinking of the scholars is that, including Rav Kafach, of course, that it got incorporated into Nevuchim. So if you go into the second part of the Guide of the Perplexed, in the 30s and 40s, it It's like a whole Sefer Nevuah, and the Rambam there says that the reason that we lost Nevuah was because of the atzvut. That, Jews are depressed. So because in order to have Nevuah, you have to have Simcha. So it's very interesting. So Rambam pinned it on the fact that Bisman HaGalut, Jews are not b'simcha.
In the whole period of the second Beit HaMikdash, there was no simcha.
Okay, so it's Kash on the Rambam.
It's not that, they fasted on Tisha B'Av.
They celebrated that Tisha B'Av.
No, they fasted on Tisha B'Av.
No, they said, didn't they after
No,
they came
fasted on
back, they
Tisha B'Av.
celebrated that Tisha
That's
B'Av.
an excellent answer.
The definite acclaimed.
No,
All right, but
just
then
meant of
the
cook.
second part, like how
They fasted on Tisha
Hasidus
B'Av in the second
look
one.
I
today,
said, come back, with Hasidus be different.
if it was prophetic. So I think the best answer is the Piasetzner, what he was doing back in Poland. And he had a meditative technique called the hashkata. And I have a friend, Zvi Leshem, who wrote his doctoral dissertation on the Piasetzner. He used to be the librarian of the Gershom Scholem collection of the National Library, but he reached age 65 and he was forced into retirement. But Zvi Leshem knows a thing or two about the Piasetzner Rebbe. In fact, he was doing this hashkata. It's a meditative technique. So that's one school of Hasidism, Piasetzner, where they were doing it. They were really in pursuit of Nevuah. Any of the others, Chabad have something called Hitbonenut. It's not. It's not being presented as Nevuah, but it's. In fact, I talk about it here. There's a fellow by the name of Eliakim Hamilzagi who was a controversialist. He was the Rav Yaakov Emden of his day, and he attacks the Mittler Rebbe, and he says that we have Jews today that they don't think you have to daven, you just meditate or something like that. And look, there's a lot going on, especially in Eretz Yisrael. There's a lot going on today. Various groups, Chabad, Breslev, Piasetzner, who are striving.
He's a great descendant from the Ba'al Shem Tov. He's a Rabbi Dover Vincent. He's a great descendant, and he compiles many meditations from many.
Yeah, so Dover Vincent is Chabad. He lives in Monsey, where I live. I met him once, not in Monsey, I met him in Brooklyn. And he's descended from.
He put on him.
Oh.
So he's a great descendant. He compiles a lot of meditations and
So the
practices.
I wanted to say saying about Hasidus, about only devoting to the tzaddik, and the tzaddik is the one that has to go. Sadly, the Ba'al Shem Tov had not. Ba'al Shem Tov doesn't emphasize the tzaddik. She does talk about it's very good for every person. It's very eye to eye. So it's only by the non-knowing level that it really begins to start.
It's in Rav Nachman and the Kutei Moharan. Benjamin Brown and Zvi Leshem have this debate. It's in the book here, where it's Zvi Leshem coming out of the Piasetzner thinks that it's democratized. And Benjamin Brown, and I go along with Brown, that it was reserved for the Tzaddik Ador. But look, there is the famous letter, the Iggeret.
Yeah.
And and Chabad became a niggin. Where the Ba'al Shem Tov has some kind of astral ascent, and he meets the Mashiach, and he asks him, this is all in the Ba'al Niggin, Emasai Kasimar, and the answer of the Mashiach is L'chshefutza Ma'amusecha Chutza, and when your well springs spread and and everyone will be able to do yichudim like you do. Okay. So there are a lot of problems with the Iggeret. First of all, is it legit? You know, there are so many Igrot Mezuyafot in the Hasidic movement. There are Igrot Balatanya that are Ziyufim, that are fake. So that's one big question. Is it legit? And even if it's legit, if you read, you'll find out there are different Nuschaot of the Iggeret. There's the Bauminger edition. Moshe Rosman, good book, founder of Hasidism, point out that in the Bauminger Nusach, you don't have this sentence that when everybody will be able to do Yichudim like you. And then Anir Katan, I question, who's to say that Yichudim are a Nevuah? Yichudim are not Nevuah. You have people in this town today, Kabbalists coming out of Bethel, Shash.
At least in one edition it says, Aliyot Neshama.
Right, but again, this is not classic Nevuah. These are Kabbalistic techniques. This is not really Hachzarat HaNevuah. Okay,
Because the whole, Rav Nazir's entire life was dedicated to that, but also he got from Rav Kook. Rav Kook is very clear that the return to Eretz Yisrael means actually Nevuah becomes part of it, available to all of us. That's what makes being in Eretz Yisrael so special. All of us, it's not the rabbi, it's not the one who's, and Rav Kook gives instructions how to prepare for it and to do, but that's, we're all going to do, it's part of the return to Eretz Yisrael. The Beit HaMikdash, all that.
Yeah, and I want to conclude because I think some people need to do the mincha, but there's a very important statement of Rav Kook where he says that you shouldn't think that Nevuah is like the cherry on the top of the cake. He says, Kisron Nevuah is a mum. That the Jewish people, as long as we don't have Nevuah, we're Ba'al Mum. Right? It's like we have a defect, a blemish. So it's something integral. It's not just the topping on the cake where you can dispense with the froze. It's something that's really integral. So as I say, I think there are people that lead us.
Yeah.
All right, thank you.